Hello. I wonder if you're here because you already think that the MBTI is meaningless and unscientific, or perhaps you're here because you use it and are concerned by the criticisms. So my name is Roy Childs, and I've been involved with psychometrics for many years as a trainer, as a test author, as a British Psychological Society or BPS verifier, and I'm currently a consultant editor for the BPS test review process, which means that I review a wide range of tests and questionnaires, which has made me critical of the direction that psychometrics is taking. It has also made me aware of how uninformed people are about some fundamental issues, even respected academics. The vitriol against the MBTI has become a partisan and uninformed debate, and in this video I've collected 10 of the most common criticisms of the MBTI, and I will be questioning their substance. But to understand my reasons more fully, you can visit the Team Focus YouTube channel, where there is a longer video, and this video will explain why the criticisms are often too simplistic, misinformed, or simply wrong. But I am aware of the increasing polarisation in our public debates. The Brexit Leave or Remain, or the pro-life, pro-choice, or Biden-Trump. And this polarisation can be seen in the type versus the trait approaches to personality. For simplicity, I will place a type, Jung and MBTI on one side and the trait, Big Five and psychometric model on the other. So let me begin. Here are the 10 most common criticisms of the MBTI, used as evidence that the results are meaningless. So just check whether you've heard them and which you agree or disagree with. And you may want to pause the video to read these. Sometimes the criticisms go behind the MBTI to attack Jung's underlying theory. And as I go through each criticism, bear in mind that behind the critic's argument there is usually an implicit or explicit belief that trait represents better science than type approaches. So I will begin with two of the more trivial criticisms. The first attacks the background of the developers. If that was fair, we could attack electromagnetism or genetics, continental drift, relativity, and even Leonardo da Vinci becomes a jack of all trades. So let's be clear, attacking the background does not make the MBTI unscientific. The second criticism is that type is not comprehensive, but who says it should be? Only those who are seeking a comprehensive map, and that was not what Jung's type theory was trying to do. So criticism 2 is like criticizing a pig for not flying. It was never meant to. So again, this is a very weak argument. The claim that MBTI theory is unscientific can be approached from several angles. Criticism 3 focuses on the emergence of type theory, which was clearly coming from Jung's insights based on a limited number of clinical cases. But since so much progress in science comes from observation plus insight, this is another weak argument used to condemn the MBTI as unscientific. So is the trait approach more scientific? Its beginnings, back to Cattell, did have a more objective starting point. To develop a comprehensive map, he used all personality-related words in the dictionary, and combined with factor analysis, this convinces many people that it is scientific. But is this sufficient? It may be a good start, but good science needs more than rigorous methodology. It needs a depth of psychological theorizing, good management, and good quality evidence. This factor analytic approach has led to the dominance of the Big Five, and now many different questionnaires based on very different kinds of items use the factor analytic funnel, which often results in 5 factors. Does this support the scientifically rigorous claim? Not necessarily. We require evidence that they are the same Big Five, and that the model itself deepens our understanding of personality, that we are not simply reducing the complexity of personality into 5 broad categories. In my longer video, I will elaborate on why the Big Five, which does tick some good science boxes, also fails significantly with others, such as the use of very eclectic items. I will also address fundamental misunderstandings or misrepresentations of type theory to help understand why criticism 3, that type theory is less scientific, is on shaky ground. I advocate a more forensic analysis of why the trait approach does not represent good science. Criticism 4, the concept of preference, comes from those who believe that personality needs to be based on behaviour. And whilst personality will clearly affect behaviour, using behaviour to measure it introduces unnecessary noise. Walter Mischel drew our attention to this in this book, where he explains how context often has more influence on behaviour than personality. And more recently, Professor Jerome Kagan, in this book, criticises psychology. In his first chapter, it's called Missing Context. And yet behaviour in context is used by most mainstream personality questionnaires, and some, like the OPQ, focus entirely on behaviour in context. You're asked to think of yourself at work, and it then claims to measure a work personality. Now this is an ill-defined and unclear concept. Behaviour in context is a role, which may be influenced by personality, but not determined by it. And a similar example of conceptual confusion is Belbin. It claims to be a role questionnaire, but does not specify a specific team or context. It invites you to generalise across anything you care to call a team. This is more like the typical behaviour mindset of personality questionnaires, which is part of this preference versus behaviour issue. And it ignores the way in which people have choices of how they operate in different teams. Perhaps it could be considered as a team personality questionnaire. This lack of conceptual clarity is prevalent in most trait and Big Five questionnaires. In my longer video, I will elaborate on how the use of preference reduces behavioural noise. In fact, it may be a better way to identify personality, which is why criticism 4 should be rejected, and we should consider the idea that the opposite is true. I will also criticise the MBTI for not going far enough. Criticism 5 uses the evidence that both type and trait questionnaires produce distributions of scores that look like this. Some well-qualified academics argue that the distribution should be bimodal, and hence the lack of bimodality invalidates type theory. It does not, and I will demonstrate how these academics have misunderstood type theory and psychometrics. I've combined criticisms 6 and 7 because they relate to the underlying model of personality. The trait theory assumption is that personality traits are continuous and static, and they place you somewhere on that continuous scale. The critics usually assume that type theory should also be static, and that by putting you in a box it is even more rigid. Now in my longer video I would explain how fundamentally the opposite is true, and that we need to reconsider the underlying model of personality. Is it static or dynamic? I will also criticise the MBTI for having contributed to this basic misunderstanding. Criticism 8 about reliability is often quoted because of the number of people who change type. Now, reliability implies accuracy, but psychometric reliability is based on consistency. So consider this target. We can be both consistent and inaccurate. When the consistency index was developed, it was to estimate the reliability of intelligence measures, and I suggest that personality is more dynamic, and that consistency is therefore an inappropriate index from which to pronounce that the MBTI is unreliable. But this does challenge psychometric orthodoxy, which is bound to ruffle a few feathers. In spite of all that, we do need to address the question of validity. What are our measures telling us? What is it appropriate to use them for? The traditional psychometric indices of validity have great limitations. They do help identify broad general trends in large populations, but they are less useful at the individual level. An associated question is, what should the measures predict? If we have a more dynamic view of personality, which decouples role behaviour from personality, then we need a new approach to evaluate validity rather than criticising MBTI for not fitting into our existing models. And finally, criticism 10 is the simple slur that the reports are like horoscopes. But type reports are not pretending to describe the person now. Jung's model involves continued development towards maturity, and the reports paint a picture that help a person recognise what their preferences could look like as they develop. The reports do not necessarily describe who you are now, but who you could become, and this changes how we evaluate such reports. We can think about personality differently, more like an MRI scan, where different parts get activated by different stimuli, and where the connections evolve. Perhaps personality is more a mosaic of characteristics that are dynamically related and in constant evolution. Using a profile that isn't supposed to change may be less real or accurate or useful as a model for growth and development. So rather than condemning MBTI for not conforming to traditional thinking, it could be praised for its contribution to rethinking personality. And this has been fundamental to the development of the type mapping system, a suite of 5 questionnaires. I would like psychology to learn from physics, which recognises the value of 2 very different theories, wave theory and quantum theory. Both can coexist and add value. But this means reducing the vitriol and appreciating the insights that each of the type and trait approaches brings. Perhaps psychology can learn from physics, which recognises the value of 2 very different theories, wave theory and quantum theory. Both can coexist and add value. With type and trait, this means reducing the vitriol and appreciating the insights that each one brings. So hopefully this video has helped you to question the 10 most common criticisms of the MBTI. And if you want to understand more of the substance that makes these criticisms oversimplistic or misinformed or wrong, then please watch the longer video with the same title on the Team Focus video channel. The address is above. It's entitled "The MBTI is Meaningless, the 10 most common criticisms explored." Thank you for listening.